Hello, this is Glenn McDonald continuing our tutorial on Visual Basic 2015. Today's tutorial we're going to talk about data validation and user experience. So we're going to very quickly look at some basics of some data validation, and then we're going to look at what some would say would be a better way to do it based on the user interface rather than having a lot of code in the background, such that you can use control properties to do data validation for you, which will minimize mistakes, increase user experience, and keep your data from being corrupted or having to be normalized. So let's get started. As you can see here, I've created a project already, and on this project I've created a form, a bunch of labels with questions, and these are text boxes in which you can enter in the number of people coming to a party and then the number of cookies that each person will eat. And there's a button here, and the idea is we're going to calculate how many cookies we need to have or how many cookies we need to bake for our party. Then after that we're going to go into a little section here which you're going to type in a province that you're from, and then this button here will get the code that you would use for the Canadian postal code system. So let's get into the code. So essentially what we're going to do is, looking at the code here, I've created a few constants. So what I've done is I've set up the minimum number of people and the maximum number of people that can attend the party, as well as the minimum number of cookies that the average person will eat, and then the maximum number of cookies which we think people will eat. If people eat too many cookies, they get fat. Okay, so we will go ahead, and when we look at the code, what we're going to do is when you click on the calculate the number of cookies button, we're going to define two local variables as integers, and then we're going to first validate whether the number of people text box has an appropriate value in it. So before anything, we should test whether something's been typed in it. Now, because the number of people could be a single digit like 5, we have to test that the length of the text box is greater than 0. So by saying textpeople.text.trim to get rid of any leading or trailing spaces, .length being greater than 0, we can very quickly check if something was entered into the text box. And if nothing's there, we'll quickly put up a message box saying nothing was entered in for the number of people. So then we'll go on and we'll test whether the value that was typed in the text box was numeric. Because if it's not numeric, we obviously can't use it in a mathematical calculation. So if it's numeric, then we will continue on with the calculation. If it's not, we're going to say, please enter a number for the people. Once we know it's numeric, we can perform our first mathematical calculation on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that the number of people is an integer. I don't think that we're going to invite 5.5 people to our party. We're going to invite 6 people. So we're always going to round up, and math.ceiling does that rounding up. We're also going to convert this value to a decimal. Alright, so we're going to convert decimal of the text value, and again we're going to apply trim always, because any spaces can mess up the values, as spaces are string characters, and when we're doing math we don't want spaces. So once we've calculated the number of people, we have a minimum and maximum people which we need to adhere to. So if number of people is less than minimum people, then we're going to say too few people, the party's canceled. So there's no point in having a party if we have less than, say, 5 people. Alright? And then so we're going to set the number of people back to 0 as the party was canceled. Or we're going to see if the number of people was greater than the maximum number of number of people that were allowed. So if their number of people is greater than the maximum, then we'll put up a message box saying the maximum limit is max people, and then again we'll set the number of people to 0. If we pass all these tests, the resultant here will be the number of people that are coming to the party, and we can now use that in a calculation. Otherwise, in all other cases, the number of people will be 0. And obviously the number of people times the number of cookies will be 0, so we're good to go. The second test is obviously going to be validate the number of cookies. Alright, and this is a very similar if structure. In fact, it's actually identical, just testing the number of cookies rather than the number of people. And so in this case, we're just going to go ahead and use the same functions. But one of the things that you need to note is that the code for this gets fairly complex fairly quickly. And this is a really simple form with simple questions and simple results. And the fact that we have a triple nested if structure in order to do the data validation seems like a little bit of overkill. So just note that for now. Once we know that we have the number of people and the number of cookies per person, we can go ahead and do a calculation. Now we're going to perform this calculation only if the number of people is greater than 0 and also the number of cookies is greater than 0. That way we're not doing math or calculations in the system that aren't going to produce us any results anyways. If either one of these are 0, then why bother doing the calculation? So then we're going to assign the number of cookies that we calculate to the text property of the label of LBL num cookies. So we're going to perform our math here, and then we will convert the result to a string as we're placing it in a text object. So let's quickly run the project and see how this works. So running the project, you can see here that if I enter an A and an X or a D in for the number of cookies and people, we calculate the cookies and you can see we get an error. Please enter a number for the number of people, and please enter a number for the number of cookies. So if we put a 4 here and leave this blank and calculate the cookies, you can see too few people, the party's canceled. Alright, so we need to have 5 people. So we're going to choose 7 people and we'll choose 2 cookies each, and we'll calculate the cookies. And you can see now with 7 people coming, 2 cookies each, we need 14 cookies. Fantastic. The second part I want to show you is what province are you in? We can type in Ontario and get the code. Good, it gives us ON. Now let's type in Saskatchewan. And that's fantastic. I get code and I get SK. However, Saskatchewan's one of those words that's really hard to spell, and it gets spelt wrong quite often. So let's spell it incorrectly here and see what happens. So if we spell it incorrectly and we say get code, it says you spelled it incorrectly or it's not a province. And that's really frustrating because a lot of people would have a difficulty typing in Saskatchewan, and they'd have to type it in multiple times, or they'd have to look it up in Google or whatever, and that's not a very good user experience. So if we go back to our form here, and let me just show you the code quickly for the text provinces. So what we do is use a select case for the text value of the text province, and we convert that to an upper so we eliminate case sensitivity. So if they type in Ontario, it'll give them ON. If they type in Saskatchewan, it'll give them SK. We could potentially put a bunch of misspelled variants in here, but then that's trying to be predictive of spelling mistakes, which I don't think is very easily. So an easier way to do this is to change the user experience such that all these checks aren't necessary. So let's quickly get rid of these text boxes for the numbers that we require, and let's use numeric up-down boxes. So let's grab 2 numeric up-down boxes. We'll throw them in here, and let's rename them quickly. So the name of the numeric up-down will be nud num people, and the name of the cookies numeric up-down will be nud num cookies. Alright. And so now let's go ahead and look at some things. First of all, for the number of people coming, the properties can be set right in here. So we can set the properties of the numeric up-down right in the properties for the box. And obviously we want to set the start value to be the minimum, which it's already set to. And we can go from there. It's already set as an integer because decimal places are 0 and incrementing by 1. If we change the number of cookies, we want the maximum to be a 4 and the minimum to be a 1. Increment by 1, decimal place is 0. So we've already ensured that it's numeric, it's an integer, and it's within the range allowable. So if we go to the calculate cookies events, instead of saying that the number of people is an integer as 0, we can automatically convert a value of me.nud num people dot value and apply it immediately, which means that we can use it in calculation. Now the value property of a numeric up-down by default is a decimal, so that's why we're converting it to an integer. All right, and we're going to do the same thing here. Sint me.nud numCookies.value, and there we go. So now we've assigned those values right away. We know that it's going to be a length because its default value is a minimum. We know that it's numeric, it's an up-down. We know it's within the range because we've set the minimum and maximum values. And we don't need to assign it a value or use math ceiling because we're assigning its value right here. So in other words, we can comment out all of this validation code we've created and simply dimension the values and perform the calculation. In fact, we don't even need this if because we know the values are going to be greater than 0 because the minimum is the numbers we've entered. So that there, we went from all that code to 3 lines, and it's totally data validated. The last thing I want to show you is the province. By having people type into a text box, you're opening it up for errors, data corruption, etc. So we're going to go ahead and create a combo box here, type in a few values to start. I'll just put in a few here for an example. And now we can go ahead and use it as a combo box. So let's quickly change this to CBO provinces. All right. And then in the code, we're going to simply, rather than calling the text box, we're going to go CBO provinces.text. And that way what we're doing is we're not allowing them to type in the values, we're forcing them to choose it from a drop-down list. So they can't spell it wrong, and there's only one of each copy. So let's run this program again. We get the program here. We can see that the number of people and the number of cookies is set. We can use little buttons here to go up. So 10 people with 3 cookies, we'll calculate it. We need 30 cookies. Perfect. And then for the provinces, we now get to choose them from a drop-down, and we can't make a mistake. So all the data validation, rather than it needing to be in the code, is actually in the user's interface. A last note, please note that this does not replace data validation that needs to be done when storing data to a database. Database incorrect data is very time consuming, and you have to go through the data normalization process in order to fix it, and that is something that most developers do not like doing. So remember that using user interface data validation is not necessarily a replacement for data validation when you're storing data in a database. Thank you very much.